Thank you. And I apologize for my outfit. Let's start back. It is just like a dark screen at first. Like Dean Barr said, I apologize. I was late getting off the plane, and so I was unable to change. The good news is that I didn't have to put on the heels that I was so worried about walking across the stage, because as a nurse, we know we never wear heels. So I'm so happy to be in flats and comfortable. I'd like to begin by just thanking Dean Barr and the UMSL College of Nursing executive staff for having me here this evening. It truly is an honor. My name is Niemeyer, and I have been a nurse in some form or capacity for over 20 years. I have worked the floor, ICU, CCU, cath lab, EP lab, home health, did traveling nursing, and have been a nurse anesthetist now for over 14 years in Austin, Texas. I understand that we have the senior class in our audience tonight, and I just thank you for attending. Yes, woo, you're so close. Thank you so much for attending, because I know you have much studying to do, or you'd rather be watching your favorite episode on Netflix, which, by the way, is a wonderful invention. Getting to watch shows whenever you actually want to, and not when it's actually on TV. When I was in nursing school, we tried to arrange our schedule around watching Days of Our Lives in someone's dorm room at noon on this thing called a television, which maybe had 10 channels. Yes, it was a sad world back then. Anyway, I bet many of you out there can relate when I say I have drawn blood, typed and screened blood, sent blood, hung blood, cleaned up blood, and given blood, and all that happened on the same shift. I have checked armbands, checked orders, checked charts, checked dates, dates on IVs, dates on fluids hanging, dates on med lists, expiration dates, and dates on food bought from the hospital cafeteria. I have even checked checklists. I have watched babies being born, carried a child into the OR to have surgery, and taken care of a mother who had just lost a child. I have rushed a man from the ER into the cath lab who was in the midst of having a heart attack. I took care of a 60-year-old man who waited in the hospital for over a year for a new heart. And when we got the call he had been waiting for, I celebrated with his family, and then I got to be the one to take him to surgery. I was also the one who sat and cried with his family when they learned he did not make it off the OR table. We all have a story, and as nurses, not only do we carry our own stories, but we hold the stories of our patients. We carry the gift of understanding and compassion. You may not believe this, but we are in some way true life superheroes. To be a nurse/superhero, you must have excellent communication skills and interpersonal skills. We must listen to our patient as we review their chart and do a complete assessment of them. It is our role to make them feel secure, safe, and valued. We are the link between them feeling as a patient that the rest of the caregiving team cares. And being a good caregiver and advocate sometimes means just sitting at their bedside, holding their hand, and listening. We learn to be flexible. You at one time or another will work 7A to 7P, 7P to 7A, 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7. You might take call, you will work weekends, and undoubtedly you will work many holidays. And if you don't, you must be very close to retiring. The superhero nurse has physical endurance. Those guys doing CrossFit and throwing cars or flipping tires have nothing on nurses. We can stand in a case for 12 hours straight without moving. We can work a double shift and never once use the bathroom, drink water, or sit down. We can pull, turn, and pick up grown men and overgrown men. And we can maneuver stretchers, wheelchairs, and crash carts quicker down any hall or through any doorway. Nurses do not always feel respected. But just as a superhero does not always find himself in the limelight, we have to understand that the reward sometimes comes in different forms and at its own schedule. Because you never know how or by what circumstances brought that patient to where they were today. I'm going to read an assessment from a chart, and I want you to let me know if you have ever taken care of this patient. Patient is uncooperative, combative, incontinent, suicidal, has a flat affect, refuses to open eyes, refuses to communicate, unable to swallow, is on tube feeding, has overbearing family members. Patient continually asks for pain meds. Just raise your hand if you have ever taken care of a patient that has any of those qualities. Exactly. Well, this was me. On April 20th, 1988, I was sent to the hospital and was later diagnosed with Stevens-Johnson syndrome, or SJS. 2 days earlier, I had woken up with a fever of 106, flu-like symptoms, itchy eyes, and a sore throat. I had started on a new medicine just 3 weeks earlier, so my mother and I were worried that this could possibly be a reaction to the medicine. My mother made an appointment with the pediatrician. It was his partner because mine was out that day. We went to see her. The doctor thought possibly it was strep. She did a strep culture and it came back negative. She started me on erythromycin, even though the strep culture was negative, and even though erythromycin actually increases the level of the drug I was already taking. She sent me home. I went home and began to feel blisters on my chest. We called her back, said there's blisters on the chest. She said it's just the virus coming out, and continued the medicines. By the next morning, I had blisters hanging off my body and on my face. I couldn't swallow. We called back the pediatrician, saw my own pediatrician that day. He took one look at me, sent me down the street to the dermatologist. I was rushed immediately from the dermatologist to Barnes Hospital. I was placed in a room with another patient who was vomiting. We could go ahead and show the picture now if you've already seen. I'm not sure how to work here. This is what you get when I show up late and I don't get credentialed on.
There you go.
Okay, that'll work. I was started on steroids as the blisters continued to spread down my trunk and my legs and face. That night I was alone, scared, and in more pain than I had ever been in my entire life. Not only did the blisters on my body hurt, but my mouth and throat were tremendously painful. I could not swallow at all. You have no idea how often you swallow in a minute until you try not to. The average person swallows 1.2 times in a minute, which is 72 times in an hour and over 700 times in a night. It was one long, painful night, and it was just the beginning. The next morning, my mother returned and was told by the doctors that my immune system would be compromised due to the steroids I had been started on. They still were not sure if it was a reaction to the medication. The blisters were growing now. They were the size of small balloons hanging off of me and were beginning to open. My mother asked why I was sharing a room with someone who was actively vomiting if I had open wounds and my immune system was compromised. Well, since I was at Barnes Hospital, which is a teaching university, I was being seen by attendings, fellows, and interns. During rounds that morning, one of the residents snuck away and went to the head of the burn unit and suggested they come see this young girl who possibly had Stevens-Johnson syndrome. I have no idea who that resident was, but I am extremely thankful for the courage that one person had to go outside their comfort zone, to do the right thing, and take a chance. After the head of the burn unit physician came to assess me, I was rushed to the burn unit. I can remember being transferred on a stretcher. I remember being on an elevator, looking up at my parents one minute, and the next minute being rolled into a room without my parents, where people immediately started tearing off my skin. I wondered, why would my parents allow these complete strangers to tear at my skin? I was screaming, crying, and trying to fight them. I learned later this was called debridement, or dressing changes, and it was done every day for the next 18 days while I was in the burn unit. And I remember every single one of them because I was given only 4 milligrams of morphine for each of my dressing changes while I was in the burn unit. And change the slide. The reaction continued to worsen until it was confirmed that it was in fact Stevens-Johnson syndrome. I was wrapped like a mummy. I had 2nd and 3rd degree burns from head to toe. And as bad as it was on the outside, it was the same on the inside. You see, with Stevens-Johnson's, it causes inflammation to the organs and sloughing of all your mucous membranes. So I could not swallow. I had a suction tube by my side 24/7, and I would fill canisters full as the lining of my trachea and esophagus were sloughed off. I remember banging on the bed, feeling as if I was suffocating whenever they would change my canisters and take my suction away from me for even a minute. I couldn't eat because my face, my lips, the inside of my mouth and throat, and whole esophagus were affected. I received tube feedings for the next 12 to 14 days through an NG tube. Many times I could not even hold that down and would end up vomiting. I had a Boley catheter for a while, but after they removed it, the pain was horrendous to urinate. I couldn't see. The rash caused by Stevens-Johnson syndrome can lead to inflammation in your corneas. In mild cases, this may cause irritation or dry eyes. In severe cases, it can lead to blindness due to the tissue damage. Okay, next. I don't think we were supposed to do that. Sorry. It's all good. I do my anesthesia better when I give talks, don't worry. Because my body was one big open wound, I was on steroids that compromised my immune system. The goal was to not allow me to get an infection and become septic. You had to wear a gown and mask and gloves to come visit me. Now let me go back to that assessment made while I was in the burn unit. Combative and uncooperative during dressing changes. Continuously asking for more pain meds. Vomiting after tube feedings. Does not open eyes to communicate. Flat AFAC, depressed, possibly suicidal. Well, if you weren't depressed before you went to the burn unit, I guarantee you would be after. See, the medicine I had started on 3 weeks prior that I had the reaction to was Tegretol. I had been talking to a psychologist because I was depressed, and he suggested I see a psychiatrist. After one visit to the psychiatrist, he prescribed Tegretol. Chose this medication after reading an article about using Tegretol, an anticonvulsant, as an antidepressant. He stated the only side effect I would have is a dry mouth. This part of my story I don't usually share when I speak, but I feel it is important to share with you as nurses, because nurses, we don't always know our patient's whole story. I was broken. I saw myself as unworthy, unlovable, and not good enough. I carried the shame of events of my childhood numerous times. Do you know the difference between shame and guilt? Shame is focus on self. Shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad. My shame caused me to feel that I was bad. I was a bad person, and the things that happened to me were my fault, and the shame grew. And trying to keep the events a secret and never dealing with them just allowed the shame to grow and create more bad feelings. My identity growing up was never a girl who was pretty, or smart, or pure. My identity was ugly and stupid and dirty. I had spent years trying to change that identity. I studied and worked hard in school for excellent grades to hide that I really felt stupid. I had boyfriends from an early age to prove that I wasn't ugly. But the dirty feeling I had inside of me would not go away. Yet even though I had straight A's and a good group of friends, I attempted suicide at age 15. I started seeing the therapist not long after that and was placed on the Tegretol the spring of my sophomore year in high school. 3 weeks later, I was in the burn unit, and my parents were told the chances of me surviving were slim, and if I did survive, I'd most likely be left blind. Looking back, my time in the burn unit was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Because surviving something as horrific as 3 weeks in a burn unit, unable to move, see, or eat, you realize how precious life is. I no longer needed to be the prettiest or the smartest. I just wanted to not feel such pain. I would dream of a cold soda or to swim in a pool. I wanted to hear birds, see a blue sky, feel a breeze. I wanted to be able to see. I wanted to dance. I did not believe in a God back then. How could I? What God would allow a little girl to have to hide in a closet downstairs to feel safe? What God would sit back and watch as a 10-year-old girl ran into her parents' bedroom, locked the door behind her, to run into their bathroom, lock that door, and then crouch down in the shower as she waited as the locks broke, knowing what would happen next? I'm very blessed to not only have survived SJS and had my eyesight, but I'm also just as thankful it happened. The life lesson I learned from the time I spent in the hospital was a gift. Given the chance to learn how each day is a gift, and the little things like going on a run, seeing a blue sky, enjoying a meal, makes life so much more enjoyable. I will never forget the first time I felt water during my recovery in the burn unit. The nurses had walked me down the hall to use the restroom. I stood at the sink to wash my hands. Yes, wash my hands, and I can say that here in St. Louis. They make fun of me in Austin for that. I placed my hands under the running water, and the feel of it was truly amazing. I can't explain it in words. It's like trying to describe how beautiful a sunset is by just saying orange or red. The feel of that water was breathtaking. I immediately pulled my foot up into the sink and could feel it on my foot. When the nurse saw how I was completely enjoying this, she offered to fill one of those plastic bath basins with water. We returned to my room and I sat at a chair next to my bed with my hands and feet in the water. Even though I endured a lot of pain and had to muster courage I wasn't sure I had, looking back, I'm so very grateful for the chance to see how we have no idea how good we have it until something really bad happens. I was able to go from a broken girl who saw her life having no value to being a young woman who was given a second chance to live a life that mattered. My identity from being a victim to becoming a survivor. Now, don't get me wrong, this did not happen overnight, and I did not have this positive, upbeat attitude while I was in the midst of it. It wasn't like I was lying in the bed as the nurses and doctors scraped the blisters off my chest and said, "This sure is the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm gonna go change the world when I get out of this hellhole." It took years. It took years of healing. My skin grew back with bumps and the color was blotchy. With SJS, your finger and toenails fall off and grow back differently, and sometimes not at all. My lungs took time to recover, and it was as if I had asthma for years. My eyes are very sensitive to the sun, and many days it feels as if I have sand in them. If I have to use eye drops, I have to use eye drops, and I've had a couple of minor surgeries on my eyes. And due to the scarring internally, I was told there was a good chance I couldn't have children. The physical healing was not the only thing I was facing. Yes, I was happy to be alive and given a second chance, but I still needed to deal with the hurts that caused my depression and forced me on the medicine to begin with, especially because I was unable to take that medicine and was scared to death to attempt another antidepressant. I worked hard to face my past and turn the lies I had of myself into truths that would build and grow me. I continued to work hard in high school, and after graduating, attended UMSL. I toyed with the idea of becoming a nurse, but wasn't 100% this was the path for me. After 1 year at UMSL, I decided that nursing was the career for me. I realized during that year that I was most happy when I was working at a job where it truly made a difference. I transferred to Barnes College School of Nursing and graduated in 1994 with my BSN. I worked on 9 South at SLU for about 7 months before I transferred to 9 ICU taking care of cardiac patients. After 9 months in the unit, I began doing traveling nursing. I traveled to St. Pete, Washington, D.C., Orlando, Florida, and then to Houston, Texas, where I met my husband. There was a nurse I was working with in Houston who stated she had a friend she wanted to set me up with. It was a guy she had gone to college with who had actually introduced her to her husband. Anyway, my response was, "No thank you, I'm a traveling nurse, I don't have time for serious relationships." She convinced me just to meet him. I will never forget that night. I remember seeing him for the first time standing there in his button-down shirt and khakis. I remembered he ordered a fancy red wine instead of a Bud Light, which was very intriguing. And I remember how highly he spoke of his mother. He made me laugh that night, and he has made me laugh every day since. Well, by this point, I had applied to anesthesia school. I had learned about CRNAs while I was a traveling nurse and decided this was a good fit for me. I liked the idea of a competitive graduate program and that you had to be accepted into the program. Unfortunately, I did not get accepted at first. I had made the wait list. This meant if someone who had gotten into the program declined, an opening would allow me to take that person's place. I spent the summer waiting to hear if I got in and spending time with Jeff. We saw each other every day that summer, falling in love. By the end of July, I found out I had been accepted to anesthesia school. Jeff and I celebrated and started planning our future. We talked about living together to save money while I was in anesthesia school, since it was a full-time program and I wouldn't be able to work. We worried what our parents would think of us living together. It was only a couple weeks later that we learned we were pregnant. I remember Jeff stopping at the store to pick up the pregnancy test, coming home from work one night. I know we were both looking at the test stick as we read that if the symbol was plus, and then everything else faded away. It was as if I had fallen deep into a tunnel. I couldn't hear. We sat on the couch for about an hour, and I said nothing. I cried, thinking of all sorts of things. I would have to give up anesthesia school. How would I tell my parents? Would Jeff really stay by my side? Right before we had done the test, Jeff asked me what I would do if I was pregnant. I immediately responded that I would have the baby. For me, personally, I could not live the rest of my life aborted or given my child up for adoption. Jeff said he loved me and would be by my side no matter what. We had dinner with James and Michelle, the couple that had introduced us, that evening and shared our news with them. They were by our side as well. Michelle took me to see her aunt the next day, who was a nurse practitioner. She helped me get set up with an OB. James and Michelle have been a part of our family ever since, and even attended our daughter Emily's graduation this past May. I cannot tell you what it meant to have Michelle by my side as Emily gave her speech as a valedictorian. Emily is now attending UT in Austin, Texas, studying civil engineering. But we visited many universities, one of them being Rice University in Houston, Texas. While we were in Houston, I shared the story of how her father and I met and how our family was made. I explained to her that we all have a plan, especially when we are young. We have dreams and think we know exactly how our life is going to go. But that sometimes our plans change. Sometimes we don't get what we want at the time. I told her that sometimes what we think at the time is our biggest mistake, our regret, turns into the most beautiful gift imaginable. But that day in Houston on the couch with Jeff, as I sat there and cried, I thought my life was over. All my hopes and dreams of an amazing career would never happen, and I could not imagine anything good coming in the future. The thing that I thought had destroyed all my plans turned out to create a life so much better than I could have ever dreamed. But once again, I did not know it in the midst of the turmoil. I can look back and see how Emily turned out to be the best gift I had ever been given, but at the same time, when I was nauseated, scared, unsure of the future, had no idea about the man I was about to marry, terrified to tell my parents, stressed, wondering what my coworkers would think of me, much less all the people back in St. Louis. All the work I had done over the years to become this successful nurse who had traveled and saw the world and now was going to graduate school was destroyed. My identity would return to be dirty, ugly, and stupid. That is what I was, and that is what people would think of me. Jeff and I married in October, just 5 months after our first kiss. Emily was born 5 months after that, and 1 year later, I applied to anesthesia school again in St. Louis. I shared with Jeff that I had applied and that I had gotten an interview. And the night before I was to go for the interview, Jeff said he wasn't sure we could swing it. Going back to school would mean we would be down one income, and with a house and a baby now, he wasn't sure we could make it work. I responded, well, I gave this up once, so I'm not going to give it up again if I get in, so you tell me right now if I can go for the interview. He said, go for it, baby. And he was by my side 100% those 1,000 grueling days I was in anesthesia school. I missed out on so much of Emily's life while I was in school. I would wake at 3 a.m. and study till she woke up at 7 a.m. I would watch her playing in the backyard while I studied from a school book. But the majority of her care came from Jeff those 2.5 years I was in graduate school. There is absolutely no way I could have gotten through it without him. He was by my side the day we learned we were having Emily. He has been by my side all through anesthesia school, and he has been by my side these last 5 years as I grew a company and created a platform for Stevens-Johnson syndrome. The company I'm speaking of is called Handana. In 2011, while I was training for my first marathon, I came up with this idea for a sweatband. See, I've always tied a bandana around my hand when I run to keep the sweat from getting in my eyes. This is because if sweat drips in my eyes, it burns so bad I'm literally left blinded on the trail due to the scarring I have from the Steven Johnsons. Well, while I was training, there was this young hip girl in the group, and she said what a great idea it was having the bandana tied around my hand. I went home that night and did some research and realized there were no other sweatbands on the market besides the terry cloth wristbands from the 80s. I was able to patent my design and bring the product to market in 6 months. Bandana has been sold for over 4 years and in over 4 countries. Bandana and the story behind the product has been featured in magazines, and I have been on a couple talk shows. See, bandana is more than a sweatband. I want to inspire you to cross your finish line no matter where it is in life and to empower others along the way. I want to also use this platform to raise awareness about Steven Johnson's and raise funds to go towards research with SJS. Just last year, when I was in the competition that Under Armour put on called Future Show, if you've ever seen Shark Tank, it's a competition similar to that. Next slide. I have spent years feeling responsibility as a survivor to give back. I wanted to start a foundation to raise funds so I could begin to research why SJS occurs. Because 28 years later, we still don't know exactly what causes SJS, or do we have a specific protocol set up universally on how to treat it. It is my passion to make a difference in human suffering. We all have prolonged suffering, and we all have been abandoned during our suffering at one point or another. Everyone's pain looks different. Whether you have been abused, gone through divorce, had unexpected pregnancy, been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease, or been suicidal, no matter who you are, you have experienced suffering. We can't always control what happens in our lives, but we can control how we react to what happens. And we also all have value. A philosopher, Jay Shetty, explained it like this: if you took a $20 bill and crumbled it, smashed it with your foot, would anyone still want that $20 bill? Well, of course. In the same way that $20 bill held its value, so do you. No matter how many times life will tread on you, life will crumble you, and life will scrunch you, you will always keep your value. You can be bitter and angry and give up, or you can use your suffering and life experiences to grow you and in time make a difference in the world. And we don't have to think big. Just love one. Do one act of kindness. I believe one person doing one small thing can change the world. I believe this because I have seen it happen when I met a man named Kerry Wilson, who's here this evening. Kerry was a fireman in the room next to mine. He had to jump from a burning building because he had caught fire. Every day, Kerry would hobble past my room to go for his dressing changes in the whirlpool. And every day, Kerry would stop to check on me. Now, like I said, I was wrapped like a mummy. I couldn't move, I couldn't see, I couldn't talk. But every day, Kerry would stop and say, "How you doing, Katie?" And every day, I'd give him thumbs down. Until the one day he says he remembers I was sitting up and I gave him thumbs up. Kerry and I stayed in touch. He came to my dance recital later that year. He came to my high school graduation. He came to my nursing graduation, and he even attended my wedding. But Kerry and I lost touch when I left St. Louis over 14 years ago, and I was unable to find him. The Steve Harvey Show was able to find him, though. He came on the show thinking he was going to talk about his days as a fireman, and I was able to come out and thank him for the difference one person made, a complete stranger in the midst of his own turmoil, and what that communicated to me. He didn't know my story. He didn't know how little I thought of myself or thought others thought of me. But because of his actions of just stopping by and asking, "How are you doing?" he was communicating to me, "You are important, you have value, you have meaning, and your life is worth living." Kerry wasn't the only one who communicated this to me. Yes, but he deserves it. Kerry wasn't the only one who communicated this to me. My nurses in the burn unit did this as well. I got the chance to thank them. It had been over 20 years since I had been a patient at Barnes. I was now living in Austin, Texas, and was planning a trip home to St. Louis. I called Barnes and said I was going to be visiting and would love to stop by the burn unit. I told them how I was a nurse now, and I knew how we liked our sweets. I shared how I was also a nurse and wanted to come by. The head of marketing of Barnes called me back and said she had done some research and there were still 4 nurses working in the burn unit who took care of me over 20 years ago. This was such a gift because I was able to show them I turned into the person they saw in me. Even though I was a scared, depressed 16-year-old fighting and screaming, they all treated me as a loving and caring person they knew I could become. They used their superpowers of listening, caring, being patient at any hour of any day. And those nurses began to break down the walls that I had created to keep me safe. Never believe what you are doing isn't important or appreciated just because your patient isn't responding the way you want in that moment. I would like to ask Carrie and those nurses to stand this evening, and we'd like to give them another round of applause. Carrie and my nurses did not do anything super abundant to change my life. They just cared. Don't think just because you are one person, you can't make a difference, or that you have to wait until your life is better. When I started Handana, I had a goal to make millions, so I could make a difference with research in Steven Johnson's. I thought I had to have this big, successful company before I could give back. Then I heard a story of a little boy who saved his change all year, so at Christmas time he could go to the children's hospital and stand at the register and pay for the meals of the parents who had children at that hospital. I knew in that instant that if that little boy with literally change from his pocket could make a difference, then I could do the same. It was in that moment I decided to donate that prize money from Under Armour to Dr. James Chodish at Mass Eye and Ear in Boston and his team doing research with Steven Johnson. I also signed a contract with Under Armour to license Handana. The contract read that Under Armour's version of my sweatband would be out in 2017. This felt like such an accomplishment and a true dream. I had taken Handana, the company, as far as I could as one person with no business background. I realized my true passion and talents were in nursing. I truly felt Under Armour was the perfect company to grow this product. I believed in them. The story behind the owner, Kevin Plank, was parallel to mine, and the quality people working for the company identified with the product and the story behind it. So you can imagine the disappointment when the president of product development emailed me just a few months ago from Under Armour and stated they had a change in plans and would not be bringing their version of Handana to market. My initial response was sadness and feeling I had failed. I did not achieve the goal, and I would be viewed by many as a complete failure. I even struggled with the idea of agreeing to this talk and sharing my story this evening. The challenge, though, is we only talk about people's failures when they succeed. I think it is important to share failures as much as it is great to share successes. Because our failures, our challenges, our worries, our anxieties about uncertainties, and the longer that we hold them, the more pain they can do to us. Forgiveness and letting go and the ability to rise above the challenges caused by others in our life is such an important ability because we need to learn to accept apologies that we may never receive. I believe you cannot fix yourself by breaking someone else. When we recognize by holding any negative feelings of another individual only harms the way we think, that is when we can forgive, move on, and let go. This is not easy. Sometimes our hearts have been broken, our trust has been misused, sometimes we've been exploited, and sometimes our loyalty has been tested. And that is why forgiveness does not excuse the behavior, but it prevents the behavior from negatively affecting us. So in closing, just as I have learned to forgive and move forward from a broken childhood, I have decided to move forward again. I have seen over and over through my whole life how something broken can be used to do something good. I have seen it in the people God has placed in my life. My Aunt Jean, who I look up to as a nurse growing up, who took me under her wing when I was 15 and depressed. and all my aunts and uncles and cousins and grandmother who have surrounded me with love through the years. For my childhood friend Maria and her whole family, who picked me up after one of my biggest rejections and showered me, my husband, and my children with an unconditional love, and have brought us in as part of their family for over 14 years. For Shelley, the high school friend I called the night I tried to commit suicide. She was there for me then and has been by my side ever since. But most of all, I see it every single day when I get to watch the relationship between my son Bennett and his sister Emily. To see a brother and sister's love for one another, their respect, and how they build each other up and look out for one another is such a gift. I am so thankful for my past, so I can truly cherish my present and pray to make a difference in the future. Thank you.
There are 2 mics set up, and Katie would be happy to take some questions from anybody. They're at the front of the room here.
I'm just curious, when you first thought of the antenna, was it that when you sweated you had burning in your eyes? I mean, I'm always amazed when people are creative and innovative and where that creation, that innovation comes from inside. So it's always just looking at my mind.
Well, when people ask me how I started the company, I tell them, one, it's been God since the beginning. There's no way I could have done this on my own. And 2, I am a book reader. So when I need to solve a problem, I buy the book. So I went to Barnes & Noble, I went to the entrepreneur section, and of all the books out there, I picked a book that was a product similar to mine. It was a moisturizing glove, and it was a woman who wrote it. And I followed all her simple instructions in the book. But I had never even been in a fabric store. So when I went into a fabric store to find my perfect fabric and found out it's not just in a fabric store, they only have crazy fabrics in there. I was very intimidated going into that fabric store. So I spent researching online forever to try to find this perfect fabric that I wanted. You know, the Supplex, the Nike or Lululemon fabric. And I finally got a sample sent to me from this manufacturer. And I said, this is awesome. And she's like, great, it's only so many thousand a roll. And I'm like, I don't even have a dime. Like, I don't even know if I'm really going to start a company. I literally need the scraps from your floor. And she said, okay, I will let you do small orders for a while. And that, like, every step has been that God has had his hand in it, who has just opened the door or put somebody in my life that was willing to help.
Thank you. Yeah, it wasn't long, but.
Oh, I know.
I'm usually loud enough that it's not a problem, but for everybody else.
Well, I'll ask really loud, okay? Caring was an important part of your talk and your story today. And as somebody involved in the nursing education program, how much about caring do you think can be taught? And how much of the caring are people born with?
That's a great question. I guess, like I live through, as a parent, I think of my first reaction is by example. So I think it can be taught, but I think the best way to teach it is by how you are as an instructor, how we are as nurses working with students, So yes, so much of it is inside of you, but also it's who you surround yourself with and wanting to work up to that sort of professional. So I never tell my kids to do something without me also doing it. I think a couple of years ago I was asked to be part of a competition for a fitness entrepreneur. And I'm a runner, but I'm not a weightlifter or anything like that. And it was kind of a CrossFit event. And my first reaction was, I can't do that. I'm not good enough, or I won't win. And I thought, what is that? What kind of example is that for my children to not do something only because I've never done it before, or I may not be the best at it? So I went and did it, and I ended up coming in third. So I do have a little bit of competition. I'm kind of competitive. It's like I'm out there. It's like, watch out, girls.
Burpees like nobody else.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
Thank you.
anyone else?
I have a question. About what I was going to ask you. Since you've had Stephen Johnson's before, what kind of medications do you need to avoid now?
So I had it from Tegretol, which is an anticonvulsant. Luckily, I don't have seizures, so that is basically the only medicine that I have to avoid. I take all other medicines, and I've never had a problem.
Do other people run a risk for that drug, or I mean, that's one of the side effects?
That is one of the more common drugs that you see Stephen Johnson's, is with antibiotics, anti-seizures, the sulfa drugs. But now that we have social media, I read stories every day about gave my child ibuprofen or Tylenol. So it can be from anything, but there are medicines that are more common.
So I have a question about your experience on the burn unit. Were you inspired to be a nurse because of the nurses? Like, did you feel like all the nurses cared for you, or did you feel like some of them were mean nurses and some of them were good nurses?
No, I had some great nurses, but I also remember being told that I didn't say yes sir, yes ma'am, and I needed to. And maybe I needed to. You know, I was 16, and I promise you I was not the best patient because I had no idea what was going on, and I was in a lot of pain, and I was suicidal. I mean, I was, but I remember another time also putting my call light on because I had to have a bowel movement, which I didn't know what bowel movement was. When they asked me what that was, I was like, what does that mean? Do you have to go poop, or have you pooped? I'm like, well, why didn't you just ask me that? Oh, this is your thing. Anyway, when I put my call light on, they didn't come, and I remember crapping on the side of my bed trying to get out of bed. Not to say that they didn't come right away, or maybe it just came on quick. But overall, I had some really good nurses, and yes, that is why I became a nurse, besides the fact that I had a wonderful Aunt Jean, who I always looked up to, who's also a nurse. Yeah. Anybody else? Sure.
Hello.
Hi.
So thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
So you currently still practice as a nursing student. Yeah. So you've told us all about what motivates you, what drives you. So in your everyday practice, how does this dictate how you deal with your patients now every day? So what is now not different, but how do you do it?
I believe being a patient is the best preparation for becoming a good nurse. And I am reminded daily in the struggle of being a patient, because we all get frustrated as nurses. You have uncooperative patients, or someone who's at high risk, or you're just drained from working a long shift, or people are trying, your supervisors are hounding you to work faster, take on more patients and all that. But when I step back and think of why I'm there and what that patient's going through, take a breath and understand that the most important thing is just caring for that person in the time, and the rest of it will work itself out. But I really am appreciative of being a patient so that I can see what it's like on the other side, because I think I do, I'm a more qualified nurse just from that experience.
I have a question.
Sure. So just recently, we were contacted by another company, and I'm hoping and praying that if that's what God's future is for the company, that this works out. Because I truly don't want, I feel like I've taken the company as far as I can as one person. I don't have any desire to go into business or to quit my job in nursing. And so I'm hoping to license it to another company, and this looks promising right now. So we will see, and I appreciate all your prayers out there.
So I have a question.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
gonna ask it from here, though. Camera shy. But throughout your entire story, you touched upon how there was always some positive person that was like a guiding light for you. How do you communicate that to your coworkers to get them to emulate that very same thing that helped bring you through?
That is a passion I have every day at work. And I, once again, think it's through your own actions. And I think people are always paying attention to those around them. And by your positivity and your work ethic and you rising above what's ever going on in your life, people start to pay attention to that and see that. And it makes a change in their behavior. And I really, truly believe that that is part of my journey to reach out to others. I also have a true passion for single moms because I was so close to becoming one. And so I go out of my way, because I have been so blessed with a great career, to reach out to others whenever I see a need, and whether it's a donation or giving them, dinner or whatever it is, I always go out of my way for single moms because I just know how hard that can be. But I do feel like it's just through your own actions how you can change the world.
Part of our education is like being able to deal with your own emotions as a nurse. In your medical career, have you ever had to have a patient who had SJS? And if you did, how did you handle that?
That's a great question. I go visit patients now that have SJS, but I have never taken care of a patient with it. I never worked in a burn unit, but during my nursing training, I had to go to burn rotation, and it was extremely hard for me to do. Just because I was so young in nursing school. I was in my 20s, 21 probably, when I took care of those patients, and it was hard for me to handle those emotions. But when I go to visit patients with SJS, it is extremely difficult even today, because for me, seeing someone, I can't imagine what it was like for my family members to see me like that. I almost feel like that's harder than being the patient. Because someone that is so disfigured, some of these patients I go see, you can't even tell it's a person in there. Mine was pretty mild compared to what some people have. So it is difficult for me. I could never work and burn. I could never, it would be really hard. Now, as far as my emotions though, as a nurse anesthetist or when I did critical care, that was easy for me. Like, I love a good code and I love running them and shock, epi, I can do all that. So intubate without any problems, or hang a line and all that. But yeah, burn would be hard for me to do. Any other questions?
Now that you're a celebrity and everything.
You're the celebrity. You're the one who's been on TV.
You got me there. Now that we're doing this Ricky Lake thing, does everybody in the studio audience get a hand down?
Everybody in the audience got a hand down.
Yeah, I'll send you the bill here. I will give everybody a great discount if you are interested. With free shipping.
Tell them you're not Oprah.
Yeah, I'm not Oprah yet, okay? So after the Steve Harvey show, Carrie called me on my cell and left a voice message, and he said, "Girl, you made me lose my cool on national TV. I gotta get my cool back because you made me cry on national TV." Love you.
I have one last question.
Yes, ma'am.
So you commented that after your Stephen Johnson syndrome, you were like afraid to ever take any antidepressants again. So what did you do, I guess, to kind of help you through your depression? And it could be your faith. that got you through. But did you seek out any type of counseling or, you know, what?
Yes, I did go to counseling off and on through college, and even after I was married. My parents and my brothers, we had a falling out, and kind of they disowned me, so I haven't spoken to them in 14 years. So part of that was what sent me back to counseling. But definitely, it was my faith. Growing up, I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school, St. Louis. I mean, I didn't even know there was another religion until I went to college. But it was, my daughter was 7, so it was about 12 years ago, that my neighbor said she just got back from a girls' trip, her Bible study group. They were drinking wine. I was like, oh. Tell me more about this Bible study group. Mentioned wine. So she invited me to the Bible study that next Wednesday. I didn't own a Bible. I didn't wear a cross. Grew up Catholic, didn't know the Bible, so I was worried that they would, quiz me. It ended up to be the most welcoming, wonderful experience. She invited me to church that Sunday. My daughter and I went. God spoke to me that day. The sermon was on, I felt I had to get my act together. Well, the sermon was on Matthew and how he's a tax collector and a sinner, and Jesus came for the sinner. And he really spoke to me that day. And Emily even said when we left there, she's like, Mom, we found our church today, didn't we? I can't say I'm pro-church, but I do know that I found my faith and that God found me that day, and that this journey started then, and he has been working on me, and that is really what healed me and what allowed me to forgive my childhood past and was able to break those chains and move forward after that, for sure. That's a question I get a lot, and that is part of why I want to put research into Stephen Johnson's, because we don't have the answers for that. I used to be very concerned when they were little and would be on antibiotics, and if they got that rash, was it going to turn into SJS? But I would say that overall, I'm not stressed all the time whenever they have to take a medicine or anything like that, because I feel like it is a very rare reaction. I just feel like the awareness needs to be out there so that if you begin to have a reaction, that you start the protocols that need to be initiated. Because now we have learned that embryonic membranes can be put on the corneas to help prevent the blindness. But if they don't put them on there in a certain window, then it still is not going to keep the scarring from occurring. And since it's still being misdiagnosed, that's not occurring in time, and that's why people are left blind. So I believe, just like when you go to the ER, you may not be having a heart attack, but if you come in with chest pain, there's a whole protocol that they're going to run to make sure to rule out MI. Well, I feel that there should be a protocol set in place that, yeah, maybe you aren't having SJS, but there's a skin biopsy they can do now that would determine if it is going to be that. So there's certain things that could be being done to at least escalate the treatment. Anybody else?
Well, you know what? She has a question. They're not asking this question, so I'm going to ask it. Based on that, yes, Sarah is her name. Based on your last statement, are you partnering with, government, your local government or federal government to kind of help push through some of these changes that you just talked about?
So I'm currently working with those physicians that we donated the money to at Mass Eye and Ear, because they are already set up to at least do the research. They have a team already in place, from the marketing to the fundraising to the whole team. So I'm working with them to do more of this awareness, so then eventually, yes, we can reach the government or set up protocols to take to different universities to start spreading the word on what they should be doing. But I'm not currently doing that yet. Thank you, Sarah.